You ever notice that when you read the news, it's always bad news? Nothing good in the world ever happens, apart from maybe some animal that can predict the future, even though by the time it's reported that they have supernatural abilities, they screw up. I'm telling you, I'm starting to think that psychic animals don't exist. Even when it's good news, the press will find a way to report it as bad news, almost as if there's some sort of financial incentive in augmenting reality to a specific type of middle-class do-nothing who's fairly well off, but not succeeding in their careers as much as they'd hoped, and rather than reflect on the personal failings that led to that, would instead prefer to blame external circumstances like society or the government, otherwise known as the average news consumer. I know, because I'm in this business. I'm also in the grandma escort business, but that's for a more mature audience. Just remember this. Good news is bad news for the news. So, when there is good news, all the whinge merchants of the new and old media will continue to try and serve their customer base by deploying a wide array of tactics that are all encompassed by a broader strategy known as lying. Performing incredible contortions to things like, hey guys, look, the cost of living crisis is alleviating. This is what happens in newsrooms. Fuck! Okay. Good economic conditions would mean that it's good news for real estate agents, so that's good. They're scum. Journalists aren't scum, just these hookers. Their words. Anyway, that's negative. That's good news. And good news for them is fantastic news for cocaine dealers, which is bad news for Redditors that aren't socially adept enough to be invited to these cocaine-funded parties. Yes! The Venn diagram of the two bubbles is converging! This is how they report good news. They report economic conditions recovering as Australian property prices are accelerating again, nearly twice as fast as wages. I mean, yeah, property prices do increase when economic conditions recover because people buy houses. Okay, what's news about that? Australian property prices are accelerating again. You already said that in the title, shut up! National home values rose by 1.4% over the June quarter, with every state capital reporting gains. They're using a quarter, this much of a chicken, and the old dirty quarter, like that last one that hasn't been sold at the chicken shop. Because, did you know that 1.4% growth in home values doubled the price of wage growth over the same period? Ooh, you hear that? That's the sound of 1,000 Redditors edging, but don't you pop just yet, my fat autists. I'm about to give you a figurative soft cock to accompany your literal one. Yes, I assume that you have erectile dysfunction problems. No, my new sponsorship deals to alleviate said problems have not been finalised just yet. Stay soft, my sweaty chums. What The Guardian did here is the same bullshit tactic they spent decades dunking on climate skeptics for. You know how they just zoom in on a single winter where global temperatures decrease to deliberately ignore the multiple decades it increased? The Guardian would be well aware that annual figures are normally used to track housing pricing changes because it's a house, not a fucking crypto flip. Yet they are deliberately deciding to use year-to-date figures in this handy table that shows just how much prices have gone up, while the ABC, understanding who their new boss is, also included the table but used quarterly and annual figures. You see what I'm saying? No? That's okay. What an idiot. The Guardian went out of their way to do the whole see the world's getting colder libtard shtick, but because their audience are the libtards, they do the libtard equivalent of climate denial, which is competent government denial. And to be fair, it was a chilly winter. They even do similar things with fun little graphics like this. Gee, I wonder why that last bar is so low. See if you at home can figure it out. If you use the Guardian's figures, Darwin had a price growth of 7.7%, but when you use figures the way they're supposed to be used, it's 6%. They slapped on another quarter. I think at this point you should just change your name to Nando's, you quarter-loving c***s. This one's particularly shameful as they contorted an example that should be celebrated, which isn't easy for me as a Sydney-sider to accept. But I'm big enough to admit Melbourne did good. The annual change in house value there is negative. Negative. Houses in Melbourne are more affordable than they were last year. Not according to The Guardian, because that would require admitting that a government policy is working and that would fly completely in the face of their business model. Melbourne should be applauded and held up as an exemplar. They achieved improvements in housing affordability by Victoria Labor aggressively addressing the housing crisis with housing targets that nearly match the national build targets of 800,000 over a decade, increasing and upgrading public housing by nearly 50,000 across the state, offering fat incentives to private developers to include affordable housing in their high-rises by fast-tracking their DAs if they do, reducing stamp duty for first home buyers, government chipping in 25% of the home's purchasing price so your mortgage is 25% cheaper, and allowing first home first-home buyers to enter the housing market by saving up just a 5% deposit. This all means that you can buy a house in Melbourne that is about 30 to 40 minutes away from the CBD for about $500,000, which with the previously mentioned government programs chucked in on top of that to reduce the price further, that is affordable to a huge chunk of not just the middle but working class. Let's compare Victoria's Epping to New South Wales's Epping and, oh what? 2.6 million, no, 2.7 million instead of 500,000? What the hell? What a flawless comparison! I swear, that's what I would do if I was doing the same shameless shit The Guardian is to argue my point. Keep in mind, the Victorian Labor government has achieved this amidst the macroeconomic backdrop of the Liberals on a federal level deliberately trying to, as Ludwig would say, up those numbers! Over a 30-year span. What Victoria Labor did is really like pissing in the wind and hitting the target anyway. This is just me, but if I saw someone do that, I'd give them props. The Guardian, it seems, would go out of their way to doctor the footage so it looks like they pissed in their own face. All the whinge merchants would. New and old media, they all pretend that this suite of policies doesn't exist first off, and then they pretend that they aren't being rolled out by the Albanese government on a federal level as we speak. Instead, what they deliberately do, like they did all through the last term of the Albanese government, as we've shown in multiple videos, they circle around each individual policy announcement. They wait for it to show its head, they rip it to pieces with their signature hyena cackle of, it's not good enough. It's honestly like staring at this part of the Sistine Chapel and saying, I don't see what the big deal is, it's just a blue wall. Slap it into a video called some shit like, the housing crisis is getting worse by the second and everyone's homeless except Clive Palmer, that's how expensive it is. Puffed up with some 20 IQ point conspiracy theory about, what if I told you nothing's being done because Anthony Albanese owns investment properties? Fuck, what a red pill. At least when Americans come up with shit like this, they'd make Albo something interesting like a pedo vampire. Our conspiracy theories are he has a legitimate stream of income. That's why he's not doing this thing that he actually is doing that I'm pretending he's not doing. Do not try to misinterpret the housing policies. Instead, try to realize the truth. There is no housing policy. In lieu of reporting on what's actually happening in the real world, they always just tack on some shithouse, oh, the solution's so simple mirage of something that's fucking impossible to replicate. Like, Singapore has a better housing system. Like, I'm just going to ignore that they are effectively a dictatorship that started that program in the 60s and pretend that we could do the exact same thing in a functioning democracy and have it like tomorrow. Despite the real world evidence that the problem is being addressed, they always pretend that it can only be addressed if negative gearing and capital gains taxes are repealed. Pretending like Labor didn't offer that twice and that it was rejected by the electorate twice. And that if they pushed on that, the reason that it was rejected is because Labor shit at campaigning. It's Labor's fault that it wasn't. Source, a supporter of a party whose constituency is everyone on Twitter suffering from Trump derangement syndrome that still couldn't win seats on an anti-Trump message. Yes. Why don't they take campaigning tips from someone that mentally ill and fried? Genuinely possessing the solipsism to believe that the way that they want to skin the cat is the only way you can skin a cat, even though the reality is you can't skin the cat that way, while right now, in front of their eyes, the cat's being skinned. That's not to say that scrapping negative gearing and capital gains tax concessions wouldn't be good. It's not even to say that it won't happen in the future. But what this Guardian article shows is that whinge merchants would genuinely prefer that cat remains unskinned, so they have something to whinge about. Why do they want to whinge about it? Because to the consumers of the news, the housing crisis means something very different to people who are actually in the housing crisis. To people in the housing crisis means I need shelter. To the average news consumer, it means I can't buy a restored convict cottage in the same inner city suburb that my parents did, and I don't want to wait for my parents to die to inherit it. That's their crisis. It's more an identity crisis than a housing crisis, really. In fact, I'm calling it now. For the working class, there's a housing crisis. For the middle class, there's an identity crisis. The voracious consumers of this dystopic fan fiction could absolutely afford a house in Liverpool. They just don't want to live in Liverpool because they grew up in Leichhardt, where they used to make fun of Liverpool with their friends at school, and fair enough. The western suburbs of Sydney should be paid out. That's their lot in life, and your lot in life is with them now. Fuck you, Leichhardt's full. It wouldn't be full if these same people stopped electing Greg's politicians who go out of their way to side with NIMBYs that block new housing in these areas to the point of it being illegal. Either way, awfully sorry, but you are not entitled to live in a semi-terrace in Newtown, you existentially offensive tosspots. And the most bitter pill to swallow for you is, you would have been complaining about living in Newtown when your parents bought a house there. Because when they bought a house there, Newtown was essentially an open-air brothel. And now you just want to live in it once all the bars have Moroccan options on the menu and the porno theatres have been converted into plant shops. F*** off. Go do what your parents did to Newtown and gentrify the fuck out of Liverpool so that one day your kids can say,
"Oh, it's the government's fault I can't afford a house in Liverpool. I don't want to live in Emu Plains."
Now, is that overly harsh? Yeah, but you have to understand something. Labor's reforms are for people who can't afford a house in Liverpool. Now, that's what a housing crisis is. I don't know what you think housing affordability means, but it means a house you can afford. That's it. That's more than enough for virtually everyone in the country that doesn't pay for a Guardian subscription. Yet, virtually all reporting on this issue is aimed squarely at those excesses of modern living standards, as they're the ones with the expendable income to fund these media outlets, whose service, as you can clearly see, is to reassure that type of like a sort of reverse psychologist.
I have problems, right?
Huh? Yeah, you have huge problems. You're a massive victim.
Yeah, okay, good. I thought so.
Well, now that I think about it, that is also a psychologist's job as well. But you can tell this is who they're feeding with the whinge merchants, all cheering on the Greens for blocking tens of thousands of homes for the homeless, not even engaging with the policy, just blanket blocking it in order to get people pissed off about the state of housing. They openly announced that this was their tactic to attract votes from people narcissistic enough to think that them and battered homeless single mothers, they're on a unity ticket. We have to stick together in solidarity, honey, against these outrageous rental prices of any Victorian-era house near a Harris farm.
Can you stop protesting affordable homes in those suburbs so I can live there too?
Oh, honey, it's hard enough to find a park as it is. The second way you can tell is they have the audacity to pull this move, which is, look, house prices have gone up twice as much as wages. It's a climate skeptic move. Yet again, they zoomed in on 1 quarter. The annual change in house values across the country was 3.4%. And the annual change in wages is 3.4%. In fact, if you just go on house prices in capital cities, annual wage growth is already outpacing house values. Again, this is not an accident. This is a feature of historic labour reforms introduced against great media backlash to guard against wage theft, increase wages, increase super, which the darlings of the whinge merchants, the so-called independents, your Teals, your David Pococks, all the members of the I'm not a liberal, wink wink, nudge nudge, we're not a party, actively tried to fuck it up. All of it. Super and wage protections. And yet still, the audiences of these lazy dystopic fiction blogs feel like they're the morally superior protectors of the poor for endlessly shitting on a government delivering real wage increases. And that's because real wage increases aren't real to their audience. Their audience don't know what a fucking poor person is. Ever since self-checkout and charger stations became a thing, I don't think they've even seen a poor person. It doesn't matter to the target audience of the news if wages start outpacing house price growth. And that is the stated intention of this Labor government with the results to back it up. Wage growth doesn't matter if you're on the market for an architecturally designed house. It only matters if you're in the market for a house. If you're not someone that has the time to sit around on Reddit and bitch about this endlessly because, you work, I'm sure you just viscerally know that wage growth is super important to you getting a house. In fact, it's the closest thing there is to a silver bullet because historically, that's what kept housing affordable. Historically, house prices were around 2 to 3 times the average disposable income, but since the 1990s, that ratio has completely blown out in favour of houses. Now they're more than 8 times disposable incomes. Annual real wage growth in Australia essentially stagnated for a decade under the Liberal Party. Under Labor, it's grown for 18 months straight. As of May, wage growth has been consistently higher under the Labor Party than it ever was under the Liberal Party. Worth mentioning as well, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, a lot of that wage growth has been driven by enterprise agreements negotiated by unions. Yet another reason you should join your union. And so for The Guardian and the rest of these lowlives to hide all this very good news with their economic equivalent of OK Magazine photographing Prince Harry's cock tawdriness, it really shows what their true intentions are. Old and new media outlets who will not acknowledge good news prove that this is a business for them. That's it. That's why we call them whinge merchants, because their product is whinging. They're not interested in solutions because solutions are problems for them. They're also not incentivized to see these problems addressed in the real world because those who they're doing this little kabuki show for are people who are pissed that they can't afford a $5 million house, not a $500,000 house. That's the audience for high-end advertising. That's the audience with the money to support their subscription models. And that's why, despite us getting more views than a lot of these pricks, we're always financially struggling because I fucking hate their audience. With a passion. I can't bring myself to do the little kabuki dance, and even if I could, I wouldn't be able to do it sincerely because unlike the writers and hosts of these outlets, I don't come from a $5 million family home. My family would have been very happy with a $500,000 house. Very happy. And as such, I'm happy to share the news with the other POV who can't afford to sign up to our Patreon. It's not good for business, but what's good for the country is more important than my business, I think anyway. And I seem to be one of the only ones in this entire industry who thinks that. Call it a poverty mindset, something none of these whinge merchants are afflicted by, evidently. Like and subscribe.